NewGenGamers.com.
Recognize that music?
Why, it's Final Fantasy,
Yes, it is, folks.
brought to us by Squaresoft. Now, in the mid-'80s, there was a slew of role-playing games in the United States on the computer market. But up to that point, the home consoles didn't have the power to play these games. The Atari, the closest thing they had was Quest, which by RPG standards was not an RPG. It was more of what we'd call today an adventure game or an action RPG game. So those games were not available previously to the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now we've got this brand new type of game that's available on the Nintendo. So the first to strike successfully
We get the actual opening screen.
Yes, isn't that awesome?
Yeah, this is after you clear the first part.
So, a company called Chunsoft in Japan creates a game called Dragon Quest and releases it with the help of the publisher Enix, and video game history is born. The first console RPG out of Japan is born. At the same time, a struggling young upstart of a video game company called Squaresoft was looking for that killer game. They tried several titles, and one of their founders, Hironobu Sakaguchi.
You should see his name here somewhere.
Yeah, that's what I was watching for him here. And also Amano, who we just saw, is pivotal for this game. But Sakaguchi made the game Rad Racer, and it didn't take off so well. And so the company was down on their luck. They had one more chance. There was one more game that they could make that before they would be bankrupt. If they were going to make it, this game had to succeed for them. So Hironobu Sakaguchi sat down and decided that this was going to be the Final Fantasy for Squaresoft. And that's where the name came from, was that this was going to be the final attempt for this company. If it failed, they were done. And it was a fantasy game.
Yeah.
So there's where the name came from. So they volleyed and released the second big RPG in Japan. And so a huge war was born between Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy as to which was the better and dominant RPG. And they both released a slew of titles over the years. And it got so big that at one point in Japan, school children were given the day off of school when Dragon Quest games were going to be released, because the teachers knew the kids were not going to show up for school. So they just called the day off and let the kids play Dragon Quest. Now,
I wish they'd do that here.
yeah, that is huge. That's never happened in America. We've never gotten a day off of school for a video game. And that's how integral video games became in the Japanese culture, especially these role-playing games. So, we picked Final Fantasy to play here because Final Fantasy has become the more enduring one and is still the more popular one. Although, in the battle between Enix and Square, Enix eventually won out because Enix was simply a publisher publishing different RPGs, where Square was developing all their titles in-house and eventually bled themselves dry with bad business moves, which, if you want to hear more about that, listen to our podcast on Square Enix. But Square Enix eventually bought Square to form all under one roof. And they also bought Taito, so all of those games are now released under Enix.
I've forgotten the original version. You have to click on each one individually.
Yes. They will not continue cycling through the enemies.
Yeah, they did. They revised that in the later re-releases, which has been re-released multiple times at this point.
Yes, this has been on many, many consoles.
PlayStation 1, Game Boy Advance, PSP. I'm hurting.
So this was Sakaguchi's big breakout title, and so Square decided what type of games they were going to make from that point on, and it was pretty much all RPGs from then on. And they released so many that we've never seen in America. They became prolific and became one of those key companies that helped make or break a video game console, whether you had their support or not. So we also saw Amano-san's name as the artistic designer of this game. He was key in many of the Final Fantasy games in drawing the characters, which, if you look at the characters here, they're pretty basic, but he came up with the original designs, which looked a lot better, and looked like actual fantasy characters, and the monsters looked a lot better. But at the time, this had great graphics. So Amano would stay on with the company for a while and do a lot of things. Sakaguchi and many of his underlings would eventually leave Square Enix, but again, that's another story. As far as the NES goes, they ended up releasing Final Fantasy 2 and 3 in Japan, but they never made it to America until
years later.
Yeah, until recently. So this is the one people knew of, and this didn't come out right away in America. Again, they didn't think RPGs were going to take off in America. So Nintendo helped publish this game in America and actually did the publishing rights for it and released a strategy guide in Nintendo Power along with it, because they knew that this depth of game hadn't been experienced by an American audience too much, and to help them get more into it, because we're dumb and have short attention spans, which I'm not going to argue with. That mindset that Japanese people have about us is pretty accurate. But I think they could have handled Final Fantasy. I don't think that was out of their reach.
Well,
obviously,
Final Fantasy 2 was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was very difficult. There was a lot of management, but obviously these games worked. RPGs are now one of the most popular genres among hardcore gamers, and so everyone who took a chance on RPGs made out at this time, especially Mr. Hironobu Sakaguchi, made out probably better than anyone individually off of RPGs from Japan. Now, another thing with RPGs and strategy games from Japan not making it to America, this was a belief that Nintendo held, and a second party of theirs called Intelligent Systems released many games like this. Now, we don't have any Intelligent System games to play for the NES because
they didn't release them in America.
They didn't release them in America.
「あの勇者たちが今ニューファミコンに出会う」「ニューファミコンでよみがえる伝説の物語攻略本付きファイナルファンタジー1、2一つになってアンコール発売」